Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and this round's really got spirit when I put Jack Hill's The Swinging Cheerleaders against Peyton Reed's Bring It On. And, this round, it was a real hard one, no pun intended. But first off, we have Jack Hill's The Swinging Cheerleaders, and the film itself is one of those, like, exploitation cheerleader movies, but it's a little deeper than that. The film's got some layers and shit. And, the film centers around this journalist major who, like, she's a hardcore feminist as well. Kay Corey, played by Joe Johnston, and she's like, her whole thing for her term paper is going to be she's going to go undercover as a cheerleader and expose all the degrading, demeaning, sexist culture and society that centers around cheerleading and all that shit. And, in the course of doing this, though, she kind of finds that, maybe these cheerleaders are actual human beings, and these football players aren't such bad guys and shit. And the film, like, itself boasts a substantial amount of TNA. Like, Rainbow Smith, who's a very lovely titties in the movie. And then you got, of course, Joe Johnston takes her shit off. I think the only one that doesn't is Colleen Camp, who is best known for playing the maid in Clue, as well as one of the playmates in Apocalypse Now. I think she shows her titties in that one. But that's neither here nor there, because the movie itself, for as much gratuitous sex that's in it, it kind of has just enough to fill the criteria of being an exploitation film in the 70s, specifically a cheerleader movie, which was a huge subgenre in the 70s. But as far as this one's concerned, this is like the Citizen Kane of cheerleading movies and stuff. Because, like, Jack Hill, one of the greatest directors to ever work, like, just in cinema in general, but especially in exploitation cinema. And the fucking, he always, like, had, like, either a good script, if he didn't write it himself, he had it, would have another good writer. This was written by two women, actually. And, but it's very fair to a lot of stuff. It's, like I said, it's very layered and stuff, because Joe Johnston's character, Kay Corey, she's got a dude that's also real radical and stuff, but it turns out, like, that dude's a real piece of shit when he gangbang. He gangbangs a cheerleader, and Jack Hill's classy enough, he doesn't actually show that scene in the movie, it's alluded to, what happened and shit. Dude gets his fucking ass whooped for it, and there's also a subplot, they have, like, Mesa State, they have, like, the greatest, one of the best football teams they've ever had. So then, like, the fucking guy that puts up all the money for all the shit and gets with the coach and the fucking math teacher and shit to fucking, plot a scheme to, like, let's fucking make this shit work to our advantage. We'll fuck with the point spread and we'll get paid and all this shit. And, but then that shit gets exposed because now at this point, Kay Corey, like, she's full on, like, in cheerleader mode. Like, she's actually bonded with these women, even though the Colleen Camp character still can't fucking stand her. She's trying to get her. Probably just because she ends up fucking her dude. But, and deservedly so. I can understand why she'd be salty about that, But the film itself, is real fun because, like, Jack Hill also understands comedy and shit. That fight scene at the end when they're going through the door and they're punching the dude. And, they just a whole line of people punching him. And then, it's just a kind of a fun brawl, but, like, with some serious consequences and shit. And the movie ends, everything works out. They end up winning the game. The fucking dipshits trying to rig the game get caught and they get fucked up. So it's like, and then everybody's like, even Kay Corey and the Colleen Camp character, they kind of says, no, it's all about the game. We got to cheer for these guys. It's all about cheerleading and shit, but it's one of those things, though, that we move forward to Bring It On, where we see, like, a movie that really takes this shit seriously. We have Kirsten Dunst coming off of The Virgin Suicides and Elijah Dushku coming off of, like, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And, and Gabrielle Union, the film itself had, like, a lot of, like, they weren't, like, unknowns, but they were still, like, coming up. They get to be the powerhouse. It's kind of this movie that did it, pretty basic, movie, about cheerleading and shit. Kirsten Dunst, her character in it, she's a senior now. She becomes cheer captain, but every fucking thing just goes wrong and shit. And then, one gal breaks her leg. That's when Eliza Dushku jumps in. Nobody likes this chick because she's all alternative and shit. And then, but when this chick comes in, she realizes that, y'all stole y'all's cheers. They fucking pull a Pat Boone on the East Compton Clovers. And, she takes them there, like Gabrielle Union and her crew. They're like, we're going to be at regionals this year, so we're going to whoop your ass. You ain't going to be stealing our shit this time. Because, you know, and so like nobody, and the thing about it is nobody knew this shit was going down. Big Red, who was the previous cheer captain, was doing this shit. And, you know, for a basic ass cheerleader movie, it's got a lot of layers. Like, you know, what other movie at this time was talking about cultural appropriation? I mean, these bitches straight up pulled a Pat Boone on them. Like, fucking, it is crazy. And, you know, also like the acting in it is really good because, you know, I say that because like nobody, like you take specifically Kristen Dunst and Gabrielle Union, you can tell that these two women are great actors because nobody could pull off that Bring It scene like if they weren't a good actor, because it on the surface it seems so laughable, but when you see these two incredible women just fucking pull that shit off, you're like, damn, because you want to talk shit about it and stuff. And it's one of those, it's a mutual respect thing. Like I said, the woman that wrote this script, you know, clearly, you know, understood cheerleading, probably was a cheerleader, you know, and was able to joke about it in a way that wasn't malicious or condescending. And also you have Peyton Reed as a director that clearly understands like comedy as well. You know, he may not be a better director than Jack Hill, but he might have made a better film, you know, because like it's one thing about it, you don't understand how good the acting is in Bring It On until you stack it up against how shitty the acting is in The Swinging Cheerleaders. And that being said, the acting in The Swinging Cheerleaders, you can't really call it shitty because like you could tell that these gals were clearly there not for their acting abilities but for their tits and ass. And another point on Bring It On is the fact that this is a cheerleader movie that doesn't rely on any bare breasts in the movie, and it's still fucking badass, very watchable. You know, it doesn't let up, you know, like I said, a lot of layers and shit. But thing about it is that's how good of a director Jack Hill was. He was still able to get performances out of his actors in The Swinging Cheerleaders to do what it needed to do, because there wasn't nobody in like a grindhouse in the 70s really, but you know, wish the acting was good in this cheerleader movie. You know, that wasn't the issue, but Jack Hill loved the cinema that much and understood it that he could still get a performance out of anybody now. But compared to Bring It On, though, it ain't shit. Because, like I said, Kristen Dunst and Gabrielle Union, and even Eliza Dushku, and even all this, nobody in this movie feels out of place whatsoever. You kind of believe every single one of these actors as what they're doing, you know, even though most of these women that were in this movie playing high school cheerleaders were not even they were like way older than high school age and shit. But, you know, that's just the magic of the cinema, because you kind of notice that when they go to that cheerleading competition, you see actual like high school cheerleaders and like, oh no, he's a Hollywood actor, you know. But like I said, this round's clearly got to go to Bring It On, because it's a movie that a lot of people don't want to admit is as great as it is, but it really does. Like I said, it's got layers. You know, you're dealing with cultural appropriation and like, you know, and also too, like, it's just this mutual respect that Kirsten Dunst and Gabrielle Union's character have for each other. Because think about Kirsten Dunst's character in that movie Torrance. That girl was all about cheerleading, you know, and when she finds out that her whole career has been a fucking lie, you know, she's devastated because, you know, she's got to know that she's the best. She doesn't want to just be handed the title. She wants to earn that shit. And even though they don't win, they come in second place, they still, like, you know, in their minds, they knew that the Clovers was better than their bullshit, but they at least could get on their level. And, you know, that's impressive enough. And that's more of a 70s ending than The Swinging Cheerleaders and shit. So this round clearly goes to the 90s. The 70s are still up by 2, though, for those keeping score. It's now 27-25. So this shit's just heating up, man. But like I said, the 90s will fucking surprise you, man. And so it's just little gems like this, because I guarantee when they made this motherfucker, wasn't nobody thinking this shit was going to either be as good as well received as it is. But there's a big ass difference. Like, you know, you don't have to be some fucking, like, you know, fucking Oscar winning actor and shit to be a great actor. Like, you know, shit like this proves that, like, no matter how shitty you think the movie is or silly or whatever the fuck, you still get great performances. And it's how good an actor is what can sell a fucking movie. You gotta have a great script, first of all. And both movies have that. But honestly, even Bring It On might even have the better script. Now, but with that great script, you gotta have a very capable director of getting what needs to be on the screen. Now, like I said, Peyton Reed may not be a better director than Jack Hill, but he did make a better movie. Because Jack Hill, like, it's a damn shame this man didn't make more movies, because like even something is what seems as silly as the Swinging Cheerleaders is still a fun time in the cinema. Like, you can't really go wrong with it. But when you see something as good as Bring It On, man, like, it just, you really feel that shit. You want these motherfuckers to win and shit. So 70s still up by 2, but 90s win this round. And next week for the main event, it's going to be North Dallas 40 versus Any Given Sunday. But there will be bonus rounds in between there, you know, because I got a lot of matchups, and I got to know who's going to win it. You know, this shit's too close for my liking, you know. And like I said, if I've said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, please feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. I don't give a fuck. This is a rough draft to my doctoral thesis. If anything, you'll be helping it get better. But also, if you got any recommendations, like I said, I've already got a bunch of these, but I'll move shit up to the top. If you got a recommendation or, you know, anything else, I don't give a fuck. Summer's almost over, but this shit is only heating up.